We are in week 2 of this series called Hope for an Anxious Generation on this sunny MLK weekend. And again, welcome, glad you're here, especially if it's your first time here, maybe first time in church. Super glad you're with us. By the way, if you are here for the first time or you're new to North Shore, just so you know, right after the service, we're hosting something called Starting Point. I'll be there, would love to meet you. It's just a way to get to know our church family, and there's lunch provided, so come on, that's enough all you need for that. So after the service today, but we're talking about teens and screens today. But before we dive into that, I actually want to start by taking you into the world of a very popular Netflix series called Stranger Things. Any fans of Stranger Things? Those of you who heard of it? This is not an endorsement for that. It's just a conversation around it. But just so you know, the idea of the show, it's set back in the 1980s. And it's about a group of kids, small town kids, who discover this like secret government project that's opened a gateway to this alternate dimension of reality that's dark and scary and filled with monsters. So it's kind of like, just for reference if you don't know it, it's kind of like The Goonies meets The X-Files meets Nightmare on Elm Street. And by the way, if you know all those references, way to go, like you are my people. It also means you're due for a colonoscopy because you are old. I'm right there with you, by the way. But Stranger Things is all about this other dimension of reality that in the show, they call it the upside down. Because it's a mirror image of the real world. So it's the same streets, same towns, same houses, but it's dark and mysterious. There's all these dangers lurking around. It's just like the real world, but it's not as it should be. It's upside down. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because I think we are living in another kind of upside down in our day today, a mirror image of the world as it should be. So same towns, same streets, same houses, but it's not as it should be. And in our case, in many ways, it's because of these. So just think about it for a moment. Think about the impact or how you see these being used all day, all the time. You see a group of teenagers, young people hanging out at Starbucks, but instead of checking in with each other, they're checking Instagram. Or you see a couple on a date or a family out to dinner, but instead of talking to each other, they're scrolling on their phones. They're all on a screen. Or you're at a concert or an event, but instead of people watching the show directly, they're watching through their phones. Again, it's happening everywhere. We hardly even notice anymore the kind of ubiquitous use of phones, devices, airports, bus stops, coffee shops, waiting rooms, while you're waiting, while you're working, while you're driving. It's all the time. And the result is we're living in this kind of new upside down reality where instead of becoming more connected to others, we're becoming more isolated, more anxious, more easily discouraged, more easily angered, especially young people today. And while lots of people have been talking about this, there's a social psychologist named Jonathan Haidt who made this a national conversation a couple of years ago when he published a book. Many of you know, we talked a little bit about it last week, this book called The Anxious Generation. And again, today's message is not about reviewing the research or endorsing the book per se, but his thesis, his point is quite fascinating. He's not arguing that screens or cell phones or stuff like that are evil and people should never use them. The point is there's this unmistakable, undeniable correlation between the emergence of this technology, smartphones and screens over the past 10 or 15 years, and the surging rates of anxiety and depression among young people in particular today. In other words, in spite of all of its benefits, this tool, this technology is kind of turning the world upside down. But what's even more compelling about this book, if you've read it or know it, is that his solution, what he points to as a solution, isn't just a matter of mindfulness or medication. He actually talks about how to that we need to fill a kind of spiritual emptiness that we all carry inside us. In fact, I shared some of this last week, but I want to read it again. He writes, Blaise Pascal wrote a paragraph often paraphrased as, "There is a God-shaped hole in every human heart. I believe he was right. There is a hole, an emptiness in us all that we are striving to fill. A phone-based life often fills that hole with trivial and degrading content. The ancients advised us to be more deliberate in choosing what we expose ourselves to." By the way, This is a self-proclaimed atheist writing about this societal problem that he would argue requires a spiritual solution. So for the 6 weeks of this series, while we're doing this in church on Sunday, we're actually gonna confront and talk about these digital challenges, but in lieu of some spiritual practices that come from the teaching of Jesus and Scripture. We're literally going back to the most ancient voice, the Ancient of Days himself, the Word of God, and what it has to say, not just about how to reduce anxiety, though I think it can do that, but how to fill the emptiness that's inside you, that's driving you to that screen or social media or sexual fantasy in the first place. So, if you have it with you, I want you to grab your series booklet if you brought this back with you, or you can grab, there's a few extras in the seats in front of you. If you don't have yours or you're here for the first time, we're gonna be on page 2, so you can open that up and take notes as we go through this as well. And you'll notice from last week, practice number 1, we talked about worship. And again, worship's not a religious term, it's just a way to describe what you put at the center of your life. Everybody worships something. You worship something. And here's the thing, what we worry about is so deeply connected to what we are worshiping in many ways because we're worshiping a lot of the wrong things. So our first and most fundamental practice is simply about returning to the practice of worshiping God, meaning letting God be God in our lives by how we express praise, gratitude, how we feel awe, reverence, but at the core of it, it's letting God be God in our lives. And just as a reminder, we have a great opportunity to do that as a church tonight, 5 p.m. There's gonna be a night of prayer and worship. It's a special night here because there's a number of other churches kind of gathering with us together, so it's a great expression of the kingdom of God and this practice of worship. So I hope we will see you all together if you're able to be there tonight. But this week, as we look ahead, we're talking about boundaries. Boundaries, particularly when it comes to screens, smartphones, digital media, because here's the reason. We can't talk about these other practices that we need to start doing until we're really clear about the things we need to stop doing. And to guide our conversation today, we're actually gonna be exploring a text written by the Apostle Paul 2,000 years ago, like way before the onset of screens or smartphones, digital media. Paul knew nothing about that kind of thing. But as you'll see, it's a relevant text to our conversation today. So we're gonna be in Paul's letter to the church in a city called Corinth. This is chapter 6, starting in verse 12. Paul writes, I have the right to do anything you say. Now, real quick pause, just for some context. When you read 1 Corinthians, what you need to know is Paul's not just writing a letter, he's responding to a letter that the Corinthians had written to him in which they posed all kinds of questions, talked about their issues. So if you go through the book of 1 Corinthians, you'll find a number of places where Paul quotes or references their words, their ideas, their challenges, and it's all over this text. I have the right to do anything. These are their words from Corinth that he refers to. You say, but, then he goes on, not everything is beneficial. Again in quotes, I have the right to do anything, their words, but, Paul says, I will not be mastered by anything. Another quote, you say, food for the stomach and the stomach for food, and God will destroy them both. And Paul says, but the body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power, God raised the Lord from the dead, and he will raise us also. Now pause, and it's worth asking the question, okay, Scotty, why in the world are we reading this particular text? What does this have to do with screens or smartphones? And at first glance, nothing. But this passage, in its context, obviously it's about sex, but it's also about a mantra the Corinthians had been using to justify their attitudes about sex. And we heard it twice in the text. Paul says, he quotes them, I have a right to do anything. And this reflects kind of their belief, their attitude, that when it comes to things like sexual behavior or other things in life, I can decide what's right for me based on my desires or cravings. In other words, if it feels right to me, it must be right for me. And again, this was just the Corinthian way of thinking. It was the Corinthian way of life. And of course, it's also the American way of life and the Seattle way of life and the East Side way of life. And not just about sex. It's true when it comes to what we eat, how we live, how we spend our time. If it feels right, it must be right, and therefore it is my right. To which Paul is saying, kind of in summary in this text, not so fast. Yes, Paul would agree, Christ has freed us from the law, meaning his grace is what makes us right with God, not adherence to rules. But that freedom doesn't mean if it feels right, it must be right. And he unpacks this in a unique way. I want you to kind of follow along. He talks about, he says, the body, where is it? Here it is. He says, the body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality. Now, starting with this idea that we have a physical body. Now, why does Paul address that? Why does he go to that place? What's he doing? Well, Paul is making sure we're clear. You're not just your thoughts or your mind or your ideas, and you're not just a soul, you're an embodied soul. And your body is how you experience the world, and it's just been designed in a certain way. In other words, you have a body, it's got a brain, it's got neurons. In this case, for our conversation, your brain has a dopamine reward system built in that sends cues around your cravings, and it can lead you to crave things that may or may not be good for your body. Did you know that? In other words, what you desire, what you feel, what you crave in your body, it may be good, it can be good, but it also can be incredibly destructive, which is why your body, because you have a physical body, needs boundaries, it needs limits, it needs guardrails around things like sex or food or work. That is what Paul means when he refers to sexual immorality. He's describing sex outside the boundaries of God's design or plans for it. Not because God believes that sex or sexual intimacy is a bad thing. God created it. It's his idea. It's a great thing. But that doesn't mean if it feels right, it must be right. It's made to be experienced within the boundaries or guardrails, in this case with sex, between a marriage covenant between a husband and a wife. But you can make the same argument around food or what we eat. You need boundaries. You have a body. So, I can say, well, I have the right to eat cinnamon rolls all day, every day. But what do? What happens if you do that? You feel really sick, right? Your body's like, no. Trust me, I've tried. I've experienced that. Same is true with your work. If you're a workaholic and you work 100 hours a week, 120 hours a week, by the way, your body is gonna crash. You're gonna experience damage even though you don't want to. You may crave working all the time. It's gonna impact you in a negative way. It's why God created Sabbath. What is Sabbath? It's a boundary around your work. So why am I telling you all this right now? Because when it comes to things like screens or smartphones or the consumption of digital media, like any other thing we consume with our body, we may think, I have the right to do anything I want with this technology. It helps me cope with stress. It relieves my worries. It helps distract me from my problems. It's just a phone, to which Paul would say, not so fast. Just like your body isn't designed for sex without boundaries or food without boundaries or work without boundaries, it's not designed for the consumption of digital media without boundaries. Because, and you can write this down, your body needs boundaries. My body needs boundaries. It's just the nature of how we are made. And again, we experience it in all kinds of ways, but we can kind of tell ourselves in other places, I don't need that. I'm in control. I can decide for myself. The reality is, you can't. And so Paul, to help us set the boundaries, you're gonna have some boundaries somewhere, but to help us set the right boundaries, biblical boundaries, God-honoring boundaries, Paul, in this text, gives us some better questions to ask than just, is it allowable? Or is it legal? Or are other people doing it? He gives us 3 questions, in fact. We're gonna walk through each one. You can write them down as we go. First question we need to ask as we're thinking about boundaries in our lives is this question: is it beneficial? Paul says you have the right to do anything, but not everything is beneficial or helpful. And by the way, just so you know, this word in the original language doesn't just refer to what's beneficial or helpful for me as a person. It refers to what's beneficial for others. In fact, when Paul uses this word, it usually refers to what's beneficial for the community or the greater good or the common good. So in the case of my phone, I have to ask myself, not just, is it allowable to use it, or could I use it, or am I free to use it? The question is it beneficial? What I'm gonna scroll through and do for the next 10 minutes, which may stretch into like 2 hours, is it actually beneficial, and not just for me, but for other people in my life? Now, just to name it, sometimes the answer to this question is yes, of course it is. I mean, when God puts somebody on my heart, I can text them a word of encouragement. It's a great thing to do. When I get up in the morning and I walk our dog, I will listen to someone on an app read scripture to me. I do it every morning. It's so helpful. It is such a blessing. It's part of my everyday life. When my daughter needs help with her math homework and I suddenly realize I don't even know how to do third grade math anymore, I can look it up right on my phone right there, right, and help, okay? There are so many benefits to this tool. From looking up information, getting directions, taking a picture, keeping a calendar, translating a language. You can pay a bill, read a book, tune an instrument, track your health. Speaking of tracking, this is also a safety measure for parents in our day to know how to find or reach their kids. It's one of the things we heard in that video. Parents want their kids to have a phone so they can find them. So the benefits are many, they're numerous, and we're not trying to discount them or say we shouldn't enjoy them or use them. But when I look at what I spend most of my time doing on my phone, there's actually very little benefit to anybody, including me. Especially if I'm home with my family and there I am just scrolling through the news or sports, being distracted. Not only am I not giving the people I love my attention, but guess what? My kids are watching me stare at that screen, which is part of the reason why they want it so bad. They just want to imitate me. By the way, quick fact for you, it's not just parents who think their kids are addicted to their phones. I don't know if you know this. According to Common Sense Media, 38% of teens think their parents are addicted to their phones, right? They see you and they do what you do. So before we check out whatever's on that screen, on that phone, on that device, to pause and ask the question, is this beneficial? Is this help? Not everything is. Doesn't mean it can't be, but not everything is. And let's also be clear as we're talking about it, the images, the content that you're going to consume when you open up that phone, for the most part, is not for your benefit. I mean, you may think it's for your benefit, but here's the deal. It is not designed for your benefit. Most of the content we consume is designed to make you angry or anxious or insecure or overstimulated sexually so that you'll keep coming back, even if it's not helpful at all. In fact, this past summer, the CDC released the results of a study on screen time and health outcomes for teenagers. And I want to read what they found. Look at this. They found that teenagers with a higher non-schoolwork screen use were more likely to experience a series of adverse health outcomes, including, and this is a mouthful, infrequent physical activity, infrequent strength training, being infrequently well rested, having an irregular sleep routine, weight concerns, depression symptoms, anxiety symptoms, infrequent social and emotional support, and insufficient peer support. Does that sound super beneficial to anybody else? And just to name it, adults, we are just as impacted in many ways by the same tools. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I stopped using social media a few years ago. I started to ask myself questions like, do I feel more or less insecure about myself when I'm done? Or do I feel more or less anxious when I'm done? And it was almost always more. I'm more insecure. I'm more anxious. So I deleted them off my phone. I turned off notifications. I rarely check them unless I'm on my computer, and it's usually just for work here and there, which, by the way, is why those of you who have messaged me on Instagram or Facebook in 2023 still haven't heard back. I apologize, okay? But I did all that not because I was sinning, but it wasn't benefiting me or anybody else. So question, what about you? I mean, the news feed you're always scrolling through that you think's just informing you about what's happening in the world, it's not as simple as that. The reels and the videos you watch over and over and over, it's not just as simple as that. You see, Just because something isn't wrong doesn't mean it's right or it's helpful or it's beneficial. So we start with the question, is it beneficial? That's question number one, but we're not done yet. Question two, we need to ask, you can write this one down. Is it cultivating freedom? Is it cultivating freedom? I love this. Again, in verse 12, Paul goes right back to their, I have the right to do anything. He quotes them twice. But the second time he says, but I will not be mastered by anything. Now this word mastered in the original language just means something that's overpowered or enslaved by something. Another way to say this is, or what Paul's saying kind of in our language, he's saying, I will not be addicted to anything. Now, as soon as I use that word, many, if not most of you, kind of immediately kind of check out for a moment because part of you is saying, well, I'm not an addict. And part of the reason we do that is because we think of addiction in this kind of extreme black and white categories only. We don't realize there's actually a spectrum of addiction that happen. We think in these extreme black and white categories, meaning you're either an absolute drunk or you're perfectly sober. You're either kind of gambling your future away or you perfectly know how to handle your money. You're either, watching pornography all day or you're sexually pure. But it's not as simple as those categories. There are problems that lie in between, but we don't just do that. We also categorize addictions as there's some really bad ones out there, like, with alcohol or sex, but then there's some ones that they're okay. They're not so bad. It's just part of how we do our lives. It's just part of modern life, like working or shopping or gossip or dare I say caffeine when we're sipping our coffee even right now, right? But Paul doesn't just say, just avoid being a raging drunk. He says, don't be overpowered by what? By anything. Meaning, don't get stuck in any kind of habit. So let me just ask you again, how's that going when it comes to this, right? Just a little moment of mass confession. It's good for the soul. I want to just ask you a few questions, and I want you to just raise your hand if it applies to you and keep your hand up, okay? Safe space, we can do this. Quick question. How many of you have ever looked at your phone for no clear reason? You just kind of opened it up, looked at it. Hands go up. That's a lot of hands, all right? Keep them up. How many of you have stayed up late or lost sleep because you were on your phone? More hands, keep them up. How many of you have literally looked at your phone while you're talking to another person? Like that, right in that moment. Hands go up. Good. Some of you are lying because you've been doing it in this talk. I've been watching you, okay? Hey, put your hands down. See, our phones are not the problem. We are, right? Everybody with a hand up, right? We're admitting, hey, we got a problem. In fact, I think most of us, just to be sane and truthful and honest, myself included, need to admit that in a lot of ways, we are being mastered, controlled, even addicted to these devices. And it's not just your fault. Remember, smartphones are kind of designed to tap into that same, dopamine reward system in your brain that drugs and slot machines and stuff like that tap into. It's one of the reasons why, get this, I don't know if you know this, the average person touches their phone over 2,600 times a day. I mean, I thought I was gonna be like, 30, 35, 2,600, but we don't even notice. Don't even notice. And if you don't believe me, here's a challenge for you this week. I want you to go home, pull out your settings on your phone, whatever you got. Check your screen time use on your phone. I dare you to take a hard look. You want to talk like at a 10x mirror kind of moment? Take a look at your screen time on your phone because it's going to tell you the truth about what you're doing. In fact, I was working on this talk and I found a site online where people had shared screenshots of their screen time report. They kind of gave a report of the time they spent on certain apps on their phone, and it was wild. I mean, people were spending hours and hours and hours a week, and not just on, the ones you would consider like normal to be on, maybe YouTube or Instagram, stuff like that. One person had spent 17 hours that week on the weather app. I mean, it's never right. Like, what are you doing? I don't know what you're doing. Someone spent, get this, 47 hours on their settings app, like reconfiguring, like what settings are you working on? 47 hours. But the killer, my favorite, get this, somebody spent over 107 hours in a week on the Olive Garden app. I mean, I know free breadsticks are a deal, but what are you doing? Like, what's happening? That's like 8 hours a day. I have no idea. Now, it's funny, it's amusing, and guess what else it is? It's alarming, right? Like, it's crazy. Like the hours and hours, the days that we spend on stuff that's not only not helping us, in many ways, it's controlling us. And what the research is now showing is it's damaging us. And it's damaging young people. For example, the visual comparison and socially prescribed forms of beauty that are normative in social media have been directly linked to loneliness, insecurity, low self-esteem, along with things like bullying and shaming and depression and even suicide. Not only that, access to video games, and in particular access to pornography, can lead to social isolation, addiction, and lasting relational damage. And this is true regardless of your age, but it's especially dangerous for teenagers and young people. Turns out, stranger things, there are some pretty scary monsters in our upside down as well, aren't there? Which is why boundaries aren't just helpful or practical, they are essential. So 3 questions. Is it beneficial? Is it cultivating freedom? And then one more, write this one down. Is it for the Lord? Is it for the Lord? Because the problem for the Corinthians wasn't just that they were following after their desires, is that they were dishonoring God with their bodies. They would say, food is just for the stomach, and the stomach is just for food, and God's gonna destroy them both. In other words, your body is just this temporary physical vehicle for things like pleasure, enjoyment, entertainment, fantasy, distraction. That's all you're made for, which dishonors the God who made you for more than just that. In fact, Paul would say your body isn't just destined for destruction, it's destined for redemption and what? Resurrection. He will raise us also. Your body's made for more. And therefore, Paul, were he living today, he wouldn't say that these things are evil. No, of course not. It's a phone. But he would say, you can't honor God if you're always staring at this. Or if you're sleep deprived because of this, or if you're disconnected to the people in your life because of this, or if you don't even know your calling or what God's doing in your life because of this, or if you're addicted to social media or pornography, whatever it is, because of this. Because your body is made for more than just food or sex or screen time. It's made for the Lord and his purposes in this world. You were made for a reason. And part of the existential crisis in our day that's so real isn't just because people are lost for no reason. It's because as we scroll, as we consume, as we stare, we get distracted from why God has put us on this earth and who we're here for and why you matter. And that's one of the things that these devices don't tell us. They don't tell you. What they can't tell you is that you matter. You're here for a reason. God has a plan for you. God has power in your life. Which then, altogether, coming back up 10,000 feet, it raises the kind of $1 million question, well then, what should these boundaries be? If we're asking the question, is it beneficial? Is it cultivating freedom? Is it for the Lord? Well then, what do I actually do when it comes to the device, right? Like how much is too much? Is there like a time limit? Or what's the age for what app, and how do we figure that out? And just to tell you, we're gonna dive into some of those questions real practically on February 10th at an event, a special event on raising kids in a high-tech world. And I just really want to encourage everybody, all ages and stages, to come out for that. Brad Griffin from the Fuller Youth Institute is going to be here. He's one of the authors of a book called Every Parent's Guide to Navigating Our Digital World. It's going to be an incredible night to sort of dive into these questions. Kind of a panel of experts to talk about. And if you have kids, there will be childcare, but we need you to register so we know how many kids to prepare for. So if you're coming with kids, let us know. Register online. But part of what I want to say today is there's no perfect answer or recipe or plan. There's no perfect amount that's going to perfectly protect you or your kids or prevent anxiety. And just to speak personally, while I've introduced some boundaries in my life that I'm kind of working through and learning from, I still got a long way to go as both a person and a parent. But to get you started this week, to get us started together, I want to call out 3 kinds of boundaries, 3 categories of boundaries that can be helpful, whether this is for you as a person or for your family. So 3 quick ones to write down and we'll wrap up. First is to this: set a boundary around when, that's the key word, when screens or smartphones can be used. Set a boundary around the when screens or smartphones can be used. In other words, set some analog-only windows in your life. And there's lots of ways to do this. You know, I've read about people who keep their phone in a bag or a jacket so it's not quite so accessible just in that moment when they're gonna pick it up. I've know folks, and I've experimented with this, where you store or charge your phone outside of your bedroom so it doesn't get used at night. You can set clear screen time limits for your kids or designate hours where they can be used, especially at night and on school days. Another practice I would really encourage to do a digital fast for 24, maybe 48, even 72 hours. Studies have been done. It has deeply positive neurological effects just to unplug for a couple of days. And the good part is you can use that time to do something really fun. You can bake, you can run, you can send your pastor a gift, whatever feels life-giving for you that you want to do with all this time you got. There's no perfect plan, but a helpful one is going to include a boundary around when the screens and smartphones are used. That's one. Here's the second one. Set a boundary around what your phone can do. Set a boundary around what your phone can do. Now, what does that mean? It means you need to have a clear way to turn your smartphone into a much dumber one. I've actually been experimenting with this with a product called Brick Your Phone. Some of you know about this. I want to throw a picture on the screen. I keep this on my fridge. Every time I walk up and hold my phone up next to it, it disables any apps that I have deemed distracting or addictive. So I still have a phone. I can receive a call, I can text my wife, I can get a message from my school about our kids and their homework, something like that, but I can't get online, can't scroll through videos. I make my phone dumb so I can be smart again and I can walk through life and figure things out, right? By the way, the parents and families in that video we showed are all experimenting with using this as families as well, and we're gonna be giving some of these away at that parent event in February. Point is not just, promoting this product, but finding this or some other tool, some other way to help you set a boundary on what your phone can do. Because it's not just the device, it's all the things that it's doing and what it's doing that can be so addictive for us. That's the second one. Then third and final boundary, set a boundary or clarity around who is doing this with you. Meaning don't try it alone. Find 2 people and try the same boundary for 30 days together so you can have weekly check-ins. Like, how's the screen time going? Like, how's it going for you? Parents, families, band together, come together as 2, 3, 4 other families so that your kids aren't the only one with these limits in their life, because there's a ton of social pressure around social media and being online. Again, no perfect plan, no perfect way, but you're gonna need a boundary around when and what and who. And just to name it as we close, I just want to call this out. If you're thinking, I can do this, like I can figure this out, I don't need the boundaries, I have enough willpower to make these decisions on my own. Here's the hard news for you today. No, you do not. And that's not me critiquing you or saying that I can. This is something that's been written about a lot. You can read about it in secular research. Willpower is far less effective in your life than you think. Whether it's about food or exercise or scrolling on your phone. I mean, just look at how every diet, every New Year's resolution, which you've probably already broken, goes, right? You don't need more willpower, you need boundaries. You need to arrange your life in such a way that you don't have to rely on your own strength. That's what boundaries are for. That's why the Apostle Paul didn't tell us to stand there and willfully resist temptation. He said, flee from it, Make sure it's in the other room. Make sure it's in the other room at least part of your day. And remember, this is the good news. It's when we admit that we lack power, that's when God's power shows up. And Paul made this clear. You may have missed it in this text, but right here at the end, he made it clear that if you want to overcome what feels overpowering in your life, it is by his power you're going to do it, not your own. And so when you leave today, just like last week, you're gonna get one of these, a little sticker for the back of your booklet that you can take home and use. And just so you know, the goal isn't to collect all of these. These are not like McDonald's Monopoly pieces or something like that. Okay, that's not the goal. The goal is to use this to make a decision, to put it on there and say, I'm committing to take a next step when it comes to boundaries around technology and digital media, because I have a body and it needs boundaries. My kids have bodies, they need boundaries. And again, it's not about legalism, it's not about rules, it's literally about your quality of life. Or better yet, the abundant life that Jesus came to help you live. And how did Jesus do that? He came down into our upside down. He took on all our darkness, all our monsters, not just so he could come back to life, but so that he could bring us back to life. Or better yet, so that he could help us live right side up. And he can do that in your life this week. So let's take a moment and pray, and then we'll wrap things up. Jesus, thank you for being the leader and master in our lives. And as we reflect today on not just digital technology, but all the challenges we face, where we wrestle with the question, should I do this? Should I keep doing this? Am I too focused on this? Is this good for me? God, help us feel the challenge, or challenge us in the way that we fall into that cultural trap of thinking, hey, if it feels good, it's probably good. Help us ask better questions, Jesus. Is it beneficial? Is it setting me free? Is it honoring you? And not for the sake of legalism, but for the sake of our lives and the quality of our lives and the experience of you and your grace and your goodness and your joy and your freedom and your purpose that you have for us. Jesus, I know in my life, I settle for so little. I settle for distraction. I settle for coping. I settle for numbing. I settle for fantasy. When the abundant life has been set before me through you, through the power of your Spirit, available to us this week. And so as we worship you, help us also take that next step to set those boundaries, those concrete decisions and commitments to protect us from where our willpower will fall short, so we can trust your power and your transformation in our everyday lives, especially around our screens and our smartphones. Jesus, help us do that in your name and for your glory. We love you. We pray this in your name. And everybody said, amen.